Okay, so the disclaimer or this disclaimer is that things that you may hear now may not be new because you may have heard it in the past years. The idea of the Cabela, the mystical meaning of Rosh Hashanah, is very profound, and it's very critical, very central to the Cabela. There's a lot of literature and elaboration on what Rosh Hashanah is, but we have to get to the basic. Now, there's the basic idea is we have to keep going back to, and then the question is, how do we connect to it in a deeper way? And that's the challenge for this year and for all years, because as we will see, part of the theme of Rosh Hashanah is that every year, whatever has been achieved has to be achieved on a deeper level. So the goal here is to lay out first the mystical meaning. Then we want to show how some of that mystical meaning is alluded to in the straightforward meaning. In other words, if you open up the Mishnah, the Talmud, you're going to see certain statements that align with the mystical meaning. And then we'll hopefully try to make it a little bit more practical and see how we can apply it to our life, hopefully. So that's the roadmap. So let's begin with the Written Torah. So the Written Torah doesn't really say the word Rosh Hashanah, doesn't say the word New Year, doesn't say the word head of the year, which is literally Rosh Hashanah. What the Torah tells you is that on the first of the 7th month, because remember, we count our months from Passover, from Nisan, which is the month of Passover. So the Torah says on the first of the 7th month, it is a day to sound the shofar, Yom Teruah, a day to sound the shofar. It does say elsewhere in the Torah that, again, on that same date, Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. That's basically all the information you get in the Written Torah. Once you get to the rabbinic sources, the rabbis elaborate and say that, what does it mean, God remembrance? Torah says Yom Zikaron, Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembrance. What does remembrance mean? So they say, well, remembrance means that God remembers everything we did throughout the year, and therefore the rabbis interpret the idea of remembrance, the day of remembrance, to mean day of. And here you have the whole concept of judgment introduced. And if there's judgment, then there is introspection before. And if there's introspection, there's repentance. And then we get the blessing for the new year. Sort of that's the judgment for the blessing for the new year. So that's how you get sort of from the biblical perspective to the rabbinic perspective. And the idea of the shofar is understood as part of the concept of Day of Judgment, because shofar is sort of the wake-up call. And Maimonides says it's the wake-up call. Stop, wake up from the slumber. And the way Maimonides puts it, from the Hevle Hazman, the nonsense of the time. In other words, we all get caught up in pursuits that really are not that, in the grand scheme of things, are not that important. And therefore, we want to say we have to wake up and realign. And so that's really what you begin with. You begin with the biblical statement, you sound the shofar, remembrance. And the rabbis interpret remembrance to become the day of judgment. And that's why it becomes that Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. And a lot of the prayer is about the judgment. We pray for life, and we pray for a good life. And that's, I would say, one of the two important themes that you get in the holiday liturgy, the idea of judgment and everything that surrounds the judgment. I want to make a pause and say something we say every year. And I said it, I said it last week as well. So we know about this, but I just want to reiterate. And that is that, why do we have 2 New Years? We have the New Year for the months in Passover. The month of Passover, Nisan, is clearly in the Written Torah. The Torah says it's the first month. And then we count years from Rosh Hashanah, but really we count years from the 7th month. So it's very strange. I don't know, I'm not an expert, but I doubt you'll find any culture that would say we have 2 New Years. One New Year is New Year for the months, and another New Year is a New Year for the years. I mean, why do you have to complicate things? Everybody has the New Year on 1/1. We have our New Year on 1 of the 7th month. It just doesn't sound reasonable. So there are all kinds of interpretations, but the bottom line is there's 2 cycles of time, and therefore we count twice because we are honoring both those cycles. And there are different ways of looking at it. So one way, which the Cabela explains, is that there really are two ways to connect to Hashem and to feel the expression of Hashem's existence in the world. The two general ways. One way is through the miracle, supernatural, unexpected. That's one way you see, you feel, you could sense a divine presence. Well, that's related to the time of Passover, because time of Passover we celebrate the miracles of the Exodus, which was completely just the concept that we can be freed is completely beyond the expectation of nature. So the season of Passover is the season of expressing and connecting to God, connecting to the miracles and sensing the presence of God through miracles, through the unexpected. And the Cabela says that represents the infinity of God. God can express, God is infinite. So where do you see the infinity of God? The fact that God is not locked in any box. God can do the unexpected. That's one way we connect to God. Then there's another way that we connect to God, and that is through nature. In other words, when you sense that nature itself is an expression of the divine power, then you're connecting to God in sort of through, you feel the presence of God in nature. That is related to creation. That's related to Rosh Hashanah. And that's why we have 2 New Years, because we're celebrating 2 aspects of godliness, the miracle and the natural. And if you want to just align it to make it neat, the miracle comes from the infinity of God. And the natural comes from the fact that God has the ability to express himself in a finite way. Because this is a very important point that the Kabbalists make. The Kabbalists say, if you confine God to infinity, then you're actually limiting him. So the definition of God is not infinite. The definition of God is complete. And because God is complete, he can express himself both through infinity, but also in a limited way. And these 2 concepts are expressed in the 2 ways where we sense God. We sense God when their miracle happens, when the unexpected happens. That's an expression of God's infinity. But God's presence is just as much, it could be expressed, could be felt just as much when you think about the natural order, when you sense God in the natural order. So therefore, we have 2 New Years because we're really connecting to 2 aspects within godliness. And that's why we have 2 New Years. 1 New Year for the months. Month is renewal, month is change. And then you have the year, which is celebrating the natural order. So that's just by way of introduction to 2 New Years. We also talk about every year the notion that our relationship with God is like a relationship. It's like a physical relationship. It's not a relationship between people, or the other way, to be more accurate, where it's the other way. The relationship between people is an expression of the relationship between is the model of our relationship with God. In other words, true relationship begins with God, and human relationships are just mirroring that. So in the relationship, if it's a healthy relationship, as we always mention, you have to have both parties have to take the initiative. Sometimes one party doesn't, sometimes the other party does, because if one party always takes the initiative and the other party is passive, that's not a healthy relationship. And therefore we have 2 New Years, because Passover is the time when God takes the initiative. Both historically, God took the Jewish people out of Egypt, even though the people were not deserving. But also within our own life, the spring represents the idea where nature comes back to life, and there's excitement and there's enthusiasm and there's inspiration that's sort of in the air. But that's fine. But then 6 months later, God says, okay, now you have to reach out. You have to take the next step. The people have to, and therefore God does not take the first step. It's the people that have to take the step. And that's the symbolism of the shofar, which we're actually calling to God. So in other words, we have to take the initiative. So why are there 2 New Years? Because in a healthy relationship, there's going to be 2 beginnings. One beginning has to be initiated by God, and the other beginning must be initiated by the human being. So that I said last week, but just to add something to that, if you think, I also said this in the past, if you think about the date that the holiday falls out on, so the new year is on day 1, but Passover is day 15. So 15 has a full moon. Right, the Jewish months follow the lunar cycle, so 15 always has a full moon, and day 1, it's just the beginning, literally just the rebirth of the moon. So one way to think about this is that full moon represents that the sun is shining on the moon, and the moon is reflecting the light of the sun. So the sun represents the giver, that's God, And the moon represents the recipient, which is the Jewish people, whose job it is to reflect the light of God, right? Because the Medrash says that the Jewish people, we count time based on the moon because we are likened to the moon. So Passover is the time when the moon is full. In other words, we're getting light from God. We're getting light. We feel that God is giving the light, giving us the light. Rosh Hashanah, there's no light, or very, very little light, just a rebirth of light. Why? Because now it's not the time for God to shine onto us. It's our time to call out to him. So that's just to touch upon why we have 2 new years and what the theme of the day is. Theme of the day, as we will see throughout the next 38 minutes. I was looking not at the clock, but I was looking at the percentage of battery. So I got misled. But in any case, we're going to see that theme throughout the entire day, what the Kabbalists call Itaruta Dilatata, an awakening from below. Passover is the awakening from above. Itaruta de la'ela, Aramaic for awakening from above, and Rosh Hashanah is the awakening from below. Okay, so just to summarize what we said so far, the big idea we started in the Torah. So the Torah tells us that it's the day to sound the shofar, and it's a day of remembrance. And the rabbis say remembrance means judgment. God remembers everything that happens, and we have the day of judgment, and that's where you get the theme of judgment throughout the liturgy and throughout the day. Okay. Then the rabbis elaborate based on the Medrash, but the Mishnah too. And they say that there's some more. There's some more. What happens? Because if you look at the liturgy of the holidays, so the way the essential holiday, the most important prayer is the Amidah. Climax of the prayer is the Amidah, which is the prayer we say 3 times a day, which is the blessings, during the weekday, it's 18 blessings, holidays, and Shabbat, it's 7 blessings. And that's the essence of prayer. If you look at those prayers, Rosh Hashanah is unique because every single day of the year has either 18 blessings on a weekday or 7, as we mentioned. Rosh Hashanah is the only day of the year that has 9 blessings. So that's just to be clear, just to be technical. Every single day of the year, the first 3 and the last 3 blessings are the same. The thing is that on the weekday, the middle blessings are a series of 12 blessings where we ask for what we need, both personal needs and collective national needs. In other words, for the entire Jewish people. Shabbat, we don't ask for what we need, or on the holidays, we don't ask for what we need. We talk about the importance of the day or the holiness of the day. So the 12 middle blessings are switched out, and instead you get 1 long blessing. It may be confusing because it's a long blessing, so in the prayer book it's divided into many paragraphs, but it's really 1 blessing. Okay, so that is every day on Shabbat. Comes Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, the middle blessing, you have 3, instead of the middle blessing, which would make it 7, you have 3 in the beginning, 3 at the end, and then in the middle you have 3 blessings are inserted. And these are the 3 themes that we talk about every year. The theme is Malchiot, kings, Zichronot, remembrances, and Shofarot is a blessing about the shofar. So instead of having 1 blessing of the theme of the day, you have 3. So all of a sudden, this must be important. These themes must be important if we're actually breaking the model of prayer for the entire year and inserting a new model, 3, 3, and then 3 in the middle instead of 1 in the middle. So obviously, these themes are very important. And this becomes the second theme that you'll find in the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, especially the first of the 3 blessings, the theme of Malchiot, of kingship. And what happens is, if you look through the prayer book and you come to the synagogue, you're going to see that most of the 50% of the theme of the day is asking God to be the king of the universe. Now, which is a very strange thing because either he is or he isn't. Why does he need us to ask him to be the king of the universe? Reign over the entire world. Why is that connected to Rosh Hashanah? Why does he need us to do that? But that's what you'll find. So in other words, to summarize, when you look at the rabbinic literature, what emerges is really 2 themes. One is a theme of the Day of Judgment, based on the idea that the Torah refers to the Rosh Hashanah as Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. And then you have the theme of kingship, remembrance, and shofar. But let's talk about kingship. Where the rabbis explain what the prayer book does. The prayer book precedes the early rabbis. It goes back to Ezra, the scribe, the beginning of the period between the first and second temple. So it goes back 2,400 years. So Ezra and his court introduced all the prayers, including Rosh Hashanah, and they put this idea of kingship, remembrance, and shofar. And then the rabbis explain why are we saying verses of kingship. So the rabbis says in the Talmud and the Medrash that God tells the Jewish people, say before me blessings of verses of kingship, so that I will rule over you, be the king over you, reign over you. Say before me verses of remembrance, so your remembrance will emerge before me for the good. And how is this achieved? The kingship and the remembrance through shofar. And that becomes sort of the logic of why we have these three themes of kingship, remembrance, and shofar. Shofar is the way it's done. And then you have the first two is malchut, kingship, and zichronot is remembrance, which God should remember us for the good, which we said that means judgment. So in other words, when you finish looking at the rabbinic literature, before you get to the Cabela, you have two themes emerge. You have the theme of kingship, God is our king, and we ask God to be our king. Why that's so important, I don't know. I mean, the rabbis don't explain. You have to go to the Cabela for that. So you have crowning God as a king, and you have the Day of Judgment. And if you look through the liturgy, not just the Amidah, the essence of the prayer, but throughout all the poems that were added later, these two themes are good. These two themes are going to repeat themselves again and again. God is our king, and we ask God to be the king, and the Day of Judgment. So all the prayers and blessings for a good year is all related to the idea of it's the judgment, and the judgment is the blessing for the whole year. So we wish people Shana Tova, a good year. So that is what emerges before we open up the Cabela. So if not for the Kabbalists, we can go home now. Of course, there's a lot more to say, but this is the essence of the day. So far, so good. Any questions, comments? Otherwise, we're gonna step into the Cabela. Now, before we even go to the Cabela, the theme of shofar is really related to both the themes that the rabbis lay out. It's related to the Day of Judgment, because shofar is the idea of wake up and correct yourself, so you'll be worthy for the judgment. So it's teshuvah, it's the repentance, and that's what the shofar does. But also, the shofar is also related to the concept of crowning God as a king, and that's because I'm told that at least in the ancient world, when they would crown a king, they would sound the shofar. It goes back to biblical times throughout the Bible. Whenever they crown a king, they sound the shofar. I have no idea what it's going to be when they crown the new king in Great Britain, but I suppose that part of the ceremony they'll blow a trumpet. So the bottom line here is that the shofar is both themes. It's the theme of Day of Judgment, prepare, wake up for the Day of Judgment, but it's also crown God as a king. So everything is neat. We have two themes, and the two themes are done through shofar. And that's the three blessings that are added to the Musaf prayer. In other words, instead of 7 blessings, we have 9 blessings. We have kingship, which is crowning God as the king. He has remembrance, which is like judgment. How do you achieve both of those themes? Through shofar. Everything is nice. We can go home and have the apple dipped in honey.
What about during the Amidah in Shacharit?
So the Amidah in Shacharit only has one middle blessing. It has the theme. That middle blessing is the theme of Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, it includes the theme of Rosh Hashanah. Now, what happens is that the third blessing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the third blessing, not the fourth, which is the middle one, but the third blessing that we say every day of the year, balloons. The third blessing becomes very, very long, and we talk about many paragraphs about Hashem's kingship. So yes, the theme of kingship trickles into Shacharit as well. But the model is not broken for Shacharit. We still have 7 blessings, 3 in the beginning, 3 in the end, 1 long one in middle about the theme of the day. Musaf is where the theme, where the model breaks, and it's in some sense it's the most important prayer of the day. And that's why we sound the shofar, by the way, that's why we sound the shofar so many times, because in the service, we sound the shofar to do the mitzvah of sounding of the shofar, the biblical commandment, which is we do that between the two services, morning and Shacharit and Musaf. After we read the Torah, we sound the shofar. After that, the rabbis instituted that when you say these three blessings of Malchut, Zichronot, and Shofarot, kingship, remembrance, and Shofar, in between each series, you should sound the Shofar. Both when the congregation, when every individual says the Musaf Amidah, as well as in the repetition. But Shacharit has the themes of Rosh Hashanah, but it still keeps the model of the 7 blessings, not the 9. Okay, so that is really a overview of what happens in Rosh Hashanah before you opened up the Kabbalistic literature, and everything seems very straightforward. It's going to be the day we ask God to be the king. That's one theme. The second thing is going to be the day of judgment, where God takes an accounting of what we do, and based on that, gives us what we need for the next year, gives us a verdict for the next year. The good news is that we're not stuck in the past. The good news is that we could do teshuvah, we could repent, and be blessed, correct the past, and be blessed for the new year. And therefore, we're correcting the past, both physically and spiritually, and we can achieve a degree of renewal. So that is, I guess, an overview of Rosh Hashanah. When you get to the rabbinic literature before you get to the Cabela. Now we want to go to the mystical meaning. And the mystical meaning, it becomes a lot more. I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. It becomes a lot more central. The idea of Rosh Hashanah becomes central to all of creation. So what does the Cabela say? This is based on the Arizal. The Cabela says like the Arizal says like this. He says, every year before Rosh Hashanah, the world goes into a faint. You may or may not feel it. If you're very mystical, you'll feel it. For Rosh Hashanah, as the last day of the year concludes, the world goes into a faint. In other words, it loses its energy. It's still alive. It's still life in the world, but that's like when a person falls asleep. The outer functions of the body are still there, but the person's mind is already asleep. So there's a sort of a slumber that falls upon the world, the universe, toward the end of Rosh Hashanah. And basically, it's like a person who you get tired. In other words, God is really getting tired of the world. What does it mean he's getting tired of the world? We don't know that he's interested in this anymore. And therefore, from the night of Rosh Hashanah, all night, is what the Kabbalists call, there's a siluk. Siluk means a removal. And the inner divine energy and light, which we'll elaborate upon what that means, the inner energy and light goes back to its source. Until the next morning. What happens the next morning when we sound the shofar? And what's at stake? What's at stake is not just, well, that's the meaning of making God as a king. What does it mean you're making God as a king? So the Cabela says we have to rebuild the attribute of Malchut, the attribute of kingship. That's the meaning of making God as a king. What does it mean? God, please be our king. We have to rebuild the attribute of kingship. What does that mean? So kingship is the attribute, without getting into the Kabbalistic terminology here, but kingship is the aspect of God that relates to the world. And there's no more kingship because God is not interested necessarily in continuing this relationship with the world. So what happens is we have to create within God, we have to rebuild Malchut. We have to rebuild the attribute of kingship. The way we rebuild the attribute of kingship is we have to draw down God's tainu, God's pleasure and desire within the attribute of kingship. In simple English, what that means is we have to get God to really want to have a relationship with the world. And from the Kabbalistic perspective, that's the service of Rosh Hashanah. That's what Rosh Hashanah is all about. Drawing down a new will and desire and energy into this world. And the way we do that is through sounding the shofar and doing everything the rabbis told us to do. So it's not a different religion. It's the same religion, but it's just giving us the deeper insight to what's really at stake. So the rabbis are cryptic. They say we have to make God as a king. So the Kabbalists say, I'll tell you what that means. What that means is that God is not interested in the kingdom. In other words, God is at the point where he says, I'm infinite. What do I need this whole creation for? So it's not that he's going to destroy the creation, but it's like doing it when a person does something and he's completely burnt out. And then comes Rosh Hashanah, and the Jewish people sound the shofar, and they're calling to God. And what are they saying? They're just saying, we want you to be our king. In other words, they're displaying the desire to connect, to have a relationship with God. And then when God sees that desire, God reciprocates, and God, that desire is awakening within God. That's the way it works. It works just like in human relationships. If somebody wants you, like King Solomon says, just like when you show whatever face you show to the water, that's what the water will reflect back to you. So that the nature is that whatever you show to a person, over time, that person will feel that. So if you show love to a person, if you feel love to a person, the other person's heart will eventually feel and reciprocate. And it's only that way in the natural sense, because that's the way it is within God. So God is awakened and triggered by our desire to have a relationship with him. So going back to the Cabela, says the Cabela, what's Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is the time when we come to the synagogue and we open up the prayer book and we say, God, please reign over the universe. And we say it so many times in all kinds of different poems and songs and expressions, but we're saying the same thing. We want you to be the king of the universe. What we're really saying is we want to have a relationship with you. And what that does for God is that brings down that awakening new fire and passion to relate to the universe, and that's what Rosh Hashanah is doing, because according to the Cabela, again, we're building malchut, we're building kingship. Now let's put all the pieces together of the puzzle and see what it really means and how to apply it to us. But again, let's think about the relationship between these two themes. According to the Cabela, so what is judgment? Judgment is not, let's see how good you are, let's hold an accounting. It's not that God is the accountant. It's that based on how much you call to God, of how much you want to relate to him, that's how much he wants to relate to you, and that's how much divine energy you get. In other words, the concept of judgment is not separate from the concept of kingship. Kingship is making God as a king, which is basically means telling God and showing God that you want a relationship with him. And that will create reawaken a will and desire for God to relate to the universe. Well, that will and desire, a byproduct of that will and desire is spiritual and physical flow to you. So the concept of kingship is how much flow do you get based on how much malchut, how much kingship you awakened. So basically we're putting both themes together. So that's the idea. And how do you achieve? You achieve it through shofar, through sounding through the verses are just to get us in the mood or to awaken this within God, but the actual action of awakening the God's desire is not necessarily by saying the verses of kingship, but the Torah says, the rabbis say verses of kingship so that I will be the king over you, and say verses of remembrance so that your remembrance will emerge for the good before me. But then we continue, Ubameh, how does this all happen? Through the shofar. So in other words, the shofar ultimately is what causes God to want to relate to the universe and re-engage with the world from a much deeper way, as we'll discuss in a minute. How does the shofar do it? So if you really want God to be your king, so send him a text message to say, please be my king, which is what we do, but that's not what does it. What does it is the cry, the sound of the shofar. And the Cabela says, because the energy that God invested in creation emerges back to its source, everything goes back to its source within the essence of God. So on Rosh Hashanah, we really have to touch the essence of God. And there is no way to touch the essence of God. The only way to touch the essence of God is by reaching the essence of our soul. So the shofar represents the primal cry from the deepest part of self, which cannot be articulated with words. What's the cry? We want you. It's like a child cries for their parent. If you have any babies at home, you know this happens. Why does the child want the parent? How is the child? It's much deeper than that. It's the primal call. And our soul calls to God in that same way, like a child, like a baby crying. So shofar is an expression of that idea. And because it comes from, we express the deepest part of our soul, therefore God's essence, our essence triggers God's essence. And from God's essence, that's how the new energy could flow outward for the rest of the year. So that's basically, according to the Cabela, that's what's really happening here. And that's why it's the shofar that does it, because we have to get to God's essence. Why do we have to get to God's essence? Because look at the Arizal, everything goes up. The will and desire, God has a will and desire to create, but all that emerges, all that goes back up within God, because it's only for 1 year. Why that is, we'll show we could elaborate upon that, of why it's only for 1 year. but we'll leave that alone for a second for right now. But right now, we're just going to summarize so far. Stage one, step one, what is the Cabela's view of Rosh Hashanah? You have to, God's energy and God's desire of the creation emerges, goes back to its source. We have to recreate the divine will for the world. How do we do that? We have to want to connect to God. And when we want to connect to God, then he wants to connect to us. And that's how the will is reintroduced. And when the will is reintroduced, so that, again, the byproduct of the will is new flow and new energy and new possibilities. And how do we make God's essence want to create? We have to dig within ourselves. We have to find a place within ourselves, the deepest will. What do we really want? We really want a connection to him. Could we articulate it? Not fully. And therefore we articulate it in the prayers, but we're not relying on that articulation. Ultimately, the way we express to God that we really want him is through the shofar, which is a much more primal sound. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the first step of what the mystical meaning of Rosh Hashanah is. And like I said, it's not introducing a new religion. It's giving inner dimension to what the rabbis did. The rabbi said, it's a day of judgment. Yes, it is. The rabbi said, it's a day we crown God as a king. Yes, it is. But why do we have to crown God as a king? So that's where the Cabela comes in and says, because he doesn't want it. Why would God want to be the king? It's like, why would somebody who is infinite want to deal with this universe? I mean, the universe is nice, it's vast, it's big, but it's insignificant compared to the infinity of God. So who needs it? So natural. So in the beginning of creation, God wants it, but that will is going to run out. And we have to recreate that will. How do we recreate that will? Well, God only wants us if we want him. Okay, so that's what the shofar is. Shofar is a call, we really want you. So that's what the Cabela would call binyan hamalchut, building the kingship. And the way you build the kingship is by awakening, revealing the part of you that wants God and revealing that sort of essential desire. So that's step one. There's a lot more to say. Like I said, there's pages and pages of literature, and we have about 23 minutes left. So we still have some more time. But that's step one. We have to first make sure we understand this before we think about what are the ramifications, and maybe not, but maybe also how to make it practical. Because making practical is nice, but even before we get practical, I try to convey it in the language of the Kabbalists so we get some of the flavor, and then we see if we could see what that means in plain English. And I'll tell you the secret. What I really mean to say is, what should I think about when I hear the shofar? That's why I'm here today. It's nice to learn everything else, but I want to know what to do. You see, it takes time for the rabbi to sound the shofar. What am I supposed to be thinking when that happens? So that's why I'm here. But okay, let's see if we get that far. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I have a question about the timing. Why necessarily, like on Rosh Hashanah, on that day? Do the rabbi make this determination based on the fact that it only says shofar on that particular day? Why is that the energy goes back on that day? It's just because that's the only place in the Torah when it says shofar sounding,
So
right?
the short answer is I don't know. I think your answer is a good answer. That's what the shofar is. That's what the shofar is. And certainly the rabbis say that's the day to crown God as a king. It may be related to the idea of the anniversary of creation. So if God wants to create the world, and every commitment is a year commitment, why it's a year commitment is another story, but every commitment is a year commitment. So we assume that at the end of the year, the commitment runs out. It's like every year you get hired with a one-year contract. The problem is, and I think Lisa wants to say this, is that Rosh Hashanah is not the anniversary of creation. The anniversary of creation is today, Mazel Tov. 25th in other words, Rosh Hashanah is the creation of Adam and Eve. So it's the anniversary of the creation of Adam and Eve. So it's not, so generally you could say, yes, we're celebrating the anniversary of creation, which we are. You say Hayom Harat Olam. Today there's two interpretations of what that means. One is today's the day that the world trembles, or today's the day the world was born. The world word Harat could come from the word Hirayon, which is pregnancy. So today the world was born. So Rosh Hashanah, it's technically the anniversary of the sixth day of creation, but we celebrate all of creation. Why? Because in some sense, humanity is the purpose of creation. So until there's Adam and Eve who recognize God, That's what we're celebrating. So the world is really not completely full so it's the anniversary of the first time people crowned God as a king. In other words, it's the anniversary of the first time when somebody had a relationship with God. Because the animals and the other creations, they don't have the same relationship with God where it's by choice. So therefore, I would say that if it's without getting into the details, it's also a Talmudic debate of when the world was created. Some people say it was Nisan, month of Passover. The halacha follows that it's the month of Tishrei. But without getting into all of this, I would say in a basic level, if it's the anniversary of creation, then that's when the energy runs out. Because at the anniversary, like, okay, fine, enough. The joke is over. Remember, it's a joke.
Thank you. That was a very good answer. It's like an anniversary of our marriage, like a relationship with God, right?
Yes.
That's what the anniversary. Yes. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Right. So that's what the Medrash says. The Medrash says that's when Adam and Eve were created, they went to the animals and they said, but in the language of the Psalm, let us go and bow before God who created us. In other words, yes, there was a creation, but there wasn't human consciousness to recognize the relationship with God until Adam and Eve, and then the relationship, then it sort of it has to be renewed. Why does it have to be renewed? Because it's absurd. The concept of God wanting a relationship with humanity, or even the universe, is absurd. The concept is absurd, because God is infinite and we're insignificant. So the whole relationship is a novelty and therefore needs to be recreated. That's the short answer. It's also based on a verse. The Cabela quotes a verse that we read a few weeks ago in Deuteronomy, which says it's the land. Israel is the land that God's eyes. God's eyes means God's providence. God is always looking. In other words, you could see that it's under the constant protection of God. Not that Greenwich is not under God's eyes, but it's not as clear. In any case, the verse says God's eyes are upon it always, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So the Kabbalists say, 1 second, if it's always, why do you have to say from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? And the answer is that it's always, but every time, but God's flow is for 1 year. So there is a beginning of the year and the end of the year, and it will always be renewed. And here you get to a deeper subtlety. The deeper subtlety is that the Kabbalah says it's not a cycle. Every year, the light that's drawn down is a deeper light, more potential, a light that was never drawn down before. So we're not recreating the same creation, right? I could show you the words of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, when he writes in Tanya, in the fourth section of Tanya, his letter is the 14th letter. He describes this concept of Rosh Hashanah and how the light is drawn down anew, and he uses those terms. He talks about how it's a new light that was never drawn down before. Maybe it makes sense to share the screen for a moment and see what's going on here. Let's see. Okay, let's see, maybe a few words, a few lines from the Alter Rebbe, not bad. Won't hurt. Okay, let's see.
Link?
Go ahead.
Can you send the link?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you.
Yes. Chat. Okay, so this is the question. The question is, he quotes, as it is written, forever the eyes of the Lord, your God, are upon the land of Israel, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Now, the phrase to the end appears to be problematic, for at the end of this year begins another year. Thus it should have surely have said, that the eyes of the God are upon the land everlastingly or continually, right? What are you saying? You're saying the eyes of God are on it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, but the end of the year is the beginning of the new year. So what does that tell you? So he gives us some Kabbalistic interpretation, some Kabbalistic liturgy expressions, but the bottom line is like this. He says every year, this radiance and efflux from supreme Chachma that irradiates the land at both these levels is renewed annually by a truly new light. For God, blessed be He, and His Chachma are one in absolute unity, which is called the infinite Ein Sof. because there is no limit nor end to the quality and greatness of the light and vitality that issues forth from him and from his chachma, from his wisdom, in elevation upon elevation to no end or limits, to the peak of the loftiest levels. In other words, God is infinite, so no matter what was drawn down, you could be surpassed next year. And every year there descends and radiates a new and renewed light, which has never yet shone from the supreme chachma to the Eretz Chaim, to the supernal land, which is Malchut, and then Israel, and then the rest of the world. For the light of every year withdraws to its source in the essence of the Ein Sof on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, when the moon is covered. It's very interesting, right? We talked about the moon, the placement of the holiday. Usually the holidays on the 15th. Passover on Sukkot is the 15th of the month. The moon is full. Rosh Hashanah, the moon, there's no moon. It is a drop of the moon. The moon is renewed on Rosh Hashanah. But think about this: the day before Rosh Hashanah, there's no moon. Happens to be my birthday. My birthday is Erev Rosh Hashanah, the 29th of Elul. My birthday, there's no moon. Why is there no moon? Kabbalistically, because there's no more light. All the light descends. And then what is drawn down afterward? By the way, the Talmud talks about this. The Talmud says, the verse says. Okay, so it's not the only source. There are other sources. So the verse in Psalms, which is the most explicit mention of judgment, says as follows: Tiku b'chol the shofar, sound the shofar in the month. Bakes aliyim chagenu, when the holiday is concealed, because it's a decree for Jacob and a decree for Israel and a judgment for the God of Jacob. So this is the first time in the Bible, in Psalms, where it says the word clearly judgment in relation to shofar. And the rabbis say, it says, Tiku b'chol the shofar b'keset, blow the shofar in the month. Which month? In the holiday. Which holiday? So the rabbis say, well, the Talmud says, the verse says b'keset, when the holiday is concealed. So the Talmud says, which holiday is the moon concealed? Rosh Hashanah. It's the only holiday on day one. It's the only holiday where the moon is either invisible completely or just barely visible. So that's how we know it's Rosh Hashanah. Now, I ask you, why does the Torah have to speak, Psalms have to speak in such a roundabout way? Just say Rosh Hashanah. You say, no, you have to allude to it. The day that the moon is concealed. Because according to the Cabela, the concept of the concealment of the moon is critical to understand what's happening on Rosh Hashanah. There's no light the day before Rosh Hashanah. Why? All the light goes back. And then when it's renewed again, that's the big deal of Rabbi Shneur Zalman is saying in number 14, in Igeres HaTshuva, in the letter number 14. So for the light of every year withdraws to its source in the essence of the Ein Sof on the eve of every Rosh Hashanah, when the moon is covered. Oh, this is what he says in the bracket. Rosh Hashanah is known as the holiday when the new moon is covered. That's what the Talmud says based on that verse in Psalms. And is not seen. In spiritual context, this means that the Sephira of Malchut, represented in the Kabbalah by the moon, the light that animates the worlds and created beings, is concealed and withdraws to its source. Afterward, by means of the sounding of the shofar, and by means of the prayers, a new and superior light is elicited, a light of a yet a higher rank in the sphere of the Supreme Chachma, to radiate to the Eretz Elyon, the supernal land, which is Malchut, and those who dwell upon it, and that's all the worlds. But again, the point here is that, and from there comes every day. Okay, without getting into this right now, we're not learning that letter. But the point here is that it's not that we're recreating God's will to relate to the world, and therefore what do we have on Rosh Hashanah? We have a repeat of last year. No, that would be just just the cycle. But the point here is that because the light is infinite, and God is infinite, and his wisdom is infinite, so therefore when the light then goes back, and we have to now once again draw down light through the shofar, the way we draw down the light is so what's being drawn down is a completely new level. So that is, again, that's just the basic. You can't start your Kabbalah, your Rosh Hashanah, the meaning of Rosh Hashanah class before minute 49, before we said everything we said. This is just the sort of level number one. Then we have to go. Then there's so many other levels to elaborate. Just for example, why did God create it this way? Why does God want that it should run out every year? So the simple answer, as I said so far, is because it's a novelty. It's absurd for God to have a relationship. So he's willing to invest only 1 year. Yeah, but God doesn't look ahead. He doesn't realize that he's going to renew it next year. If we sound the shofar, hopefully there'll be a Jew sounding the shofar and we'll renew the creation. Yeah, but the point here is the siluk, the withdrawal is in order for the people to seek out God and reach deeper within themselves, and therefore reach deeper within God. In other words, that's part of the game. And the Kabbalah has a metaphor. Parent hides their face from their child. Why do you do that? Why do you hide? So they should seek you out. In other words, God doesn't want a relationship where he comes in and he says, you know what, I'm investing for the next 6,000 years. I want to have a relationship with the world. No, there's no point in that. The point is that it's absurd for God to be here. He wants to be here only as long as we're going to look for him. So therefore, that's the way he sets it up. It's for 1 year. And then the point of the siluk, the point of the concealment is that we should feel the withdrawal. And if we were spiritual people, we would feel my birthday, the night of Rosh Hashanah, you would feel weak. You would feel weak. You would, if you were connected to the inner energy of the world, because remember, the outer energy of the world looks the same. Just like when you see someone sleeping, still alive, the heart is still pumping, there's still a pulse. Maybe the pulse is lower, but the pulse is still there. But if you're connected to the inner energy of the universe, there's nothing going on. This person is not thinking, the person is not conscious. The consciousness went back to its source. So that's what's happening on the night of Rosh Hashanah. So why does God set it up? So that we should sense the distance, so that we should sense the withdrawal, the vacuum, and we should desire to have a relationship with him. We should articulate that desire. And that, because it's coming from a deep place within ourselves, touches the essence of God. And therefore, the new level, the new light that comes down is on a completely different level. So again, there's all kinds of angles to think about this, and this can be taken in all different directions. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to go to what I want to talk about. I apologize in advance. I want to talk about what does this mean for me, and what is this? What am I thinking about when I'm blowing the shofar? Not here to give a confession. I'm saying, what should I? This is all aspirational. Sometimes I think about what's for lunch, but hopefully that's not what we're supposed to be thinking about. Okay, so according to the Cabela, everything according to what we said, if the essence of the day of Rosh Hashanah is to bring down, to show God that we want to have a relationship with him, we want him to be the reign the universe, which is basically in simple English, it's have a relationship with us. And so then what's happening here is, what do I need to show? I need to show that I really, so you're bringing down, you're trying to create God, we're trying to elicit within God a new desire and will and pleasure. Will and pleasure go together, by the way. What do I want? I want what's pleasurable for me. So I want to create the Ratzon V'Tainug. I want it. That's the language that the Kabbalah uses. Will and pleasure in kingship. I want God to have will and pleasure in kingship. In other words, I want him to have will and pleasure in the relationship. Because in human relationships, this is very clear. I always say this. What's the most important thing in the relationship? Whatever you're going to answer is only true if it comes after what I'm about to say, which is will and pleasure. So you can have the best relationship with the person. In other words, the person could be giving you everything you want. But if you know they don't want to be here, it's a non-starter. You can take me out to the best restaurant, and you can buy me the best food and the best drink and say, this is a wonderful date, but you don't want to be here. You don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I need to know that your will and your pleasure is here. If your will and pleasure is elsewhere, then nothing else can go beyond that, because that's the foundation. So again, we want God to have a will and pleasure in the universe. So we have to find within ourselves the will and pleasure to, according to the Kabbalah, we have to want God to be our sovereign. We have to want the relationship with God. So what does that mean in simple English? In simple English means, what do I want? What is my pleasure? Now that is a very, very deep question, because most of our day we're busy we're thinking about what is pressing. What do I need to do? Well, what do I want? I want to make sure that I don't miss lunch. I want to make sure that I don't get a ticket for parking in the wrong place. I have a lot of things that I want. But when you ask yourself, what do I really want? What do I want for myself? What do I want from the year? What do I want from the year? And then what do I really want? What's my real pleasure? What gives me deep pleasure, as opposed to temporary pleasure? And this is the true introspection. Introspection is not so much, what did I do wrong? Did I say something nice to? I have to correct that. That too. So introspection is also on the action, but the introspection is, could I realign my will? What do I really want from this year? And sometimes we get so caught up in the details and we forget to ask the big question. What do I want from this year? Where is my pleasure this year? And I have to realign. In other words, find within myself the true deeper pleasure. And in some sense, maybe this is why Rosh Hashanah falls out in the 7th month. Because what is the 7th month? That's Shabbat. number 7 in Judaism is Shabbat. And you have all kinds of cycles. You have 7th day is Shabbat. The 7th year is the sabbatical. After 7 cycles of 7, you have the Jubilee, which is again stop. And what is Shabbat? So Shabbat is all day, all week, we're dealing with the technicalities of life. We're trying to build, we're trying to achieve. Where is the pleasure of life? Why am I doing all of this? That you don't have time to think about that when you are trying to close a deal or plow the field. Shabbat, when you cease to do action, now you ask yourself on a deeper level, what's the purpose? And what is my purpose? And what do I want? And where's my pleasure? That's why Shabbos is tied into pleasure. It's a mitzvah to have pleasure with food and drink, because 6 days a week is not a time for pleasure. You can enjoy what you're doing, that's fine. But ultimately, it's all preparation for the true pleasure, which is Shabbat. So if Rosh Hashanah is the Shabbat of the year, that's why it's in the 7th month, then that's the theme. I ask myself and realign and rediscover, what do I really want? Because what I really want usually is not at the surface. And if I could start bringing examples from my own personal life, I just don't want to bore you. But for example, okay, shouldn't do this, but I'll do it anyway. For example, child comes home, child wants to play. What do I want to do? I say, I'd rather sit on the couch and read. Okay, that's assumed. I'd rather sit on the couch and eat semichkis. What are they? Sunflower seeds or seeds. Okay, so that's what I want in the moment. But what do I really want? What I really want is to have a relationship with my child. Okay, but I'm not always getting to that deeper will, because that deeper will is layered with more external wills. So what's Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is peel away the external will and get to what I really want. And what I really want is going to be tied to the will of my godly soul. It's going to be tied to transcendence. It's going to be tied to go beyond myself, connect to God, connect to something greater than myself, connect to other people. But that will is usually throughout the year, it could be layered and could be covered because we're too busy. And then Rosh Hashanah says, okay, everything else is stopping. God is putting everything on hold. There's really all the energy. Why do I really want this? What do I want in this entire enterprise called the universe, called the world, called life? And I have to answer that for myself before I can get God to answer that question. And if I say, now what I really want is transcendence, what I really want is to connect to God, that's my deepest will. All my other wills are just to support this will. Oh, then that creates within God the same idea. And that creates within God the will and pleasure to create. So in other words, the introspection, part of the introspection is, what do I want? What do I want? And what am I going to enjoy this coming year? And hopefully, once I set my mind on that, then my actions and my day-to-day and my to-do list starts reflecting what I really want. Because sometimes they don't reflect. But the idea is, can I reveal my deeper will, my deeper pleasure, to the extent that now the other things that I do in my life are reflecting that deeper will. So when I have the choice to eat the sunflowers or to eat the semichkis or to do what I really want to do, which is have a deep relationship with the people around me, the action will conform to the deeper will. But just because it's the deeper will, it doesn't mean it's the most dominant will. And that's where Rosh Hashanah happens. Everything goes back to its source. Everything else falls away. What do you really want? And ultimately, you ask yourself that question as you're preparing for the shofar. And ultimately, shofar is the expression of what I really want. Now, what do you really want? Well, you can't really articulate it. That's why there are no words, right? Deepest place of your soul, the soul's yearning to reconnect to God, to have a relationship with God. You can't, it's the rabbis try. We have to live here for a poem here, a poem there. We keep adding poems. We hire the cantors because the poems are so long and they'll get boring if there's no singing. But the bottom line is we're trying to articulate. We're doing the best we can. Ultimately, when it comes to the moment of truth, we turn to God, we don't say anything. Because what I really want, the depths of my soul, I can't really articulate. But I can feel it. And I could articulate the lead up to it. I could a process of elimination. I say what I don't want. I say what I do want to the best of my ability to articulate. But ultimately, we're peeling away layers. And the sound of the shofar is, what do I really want? And what I really want is I'm a child. My soul's like a child crying. It feels that connection. It feels that bond. And we have to discover that desire within ourselves. And when we do that, God's will and God's pleasure in creation is restored. And for the next year, and what comes along, a byproduct is blessing, health, family, wealth, all good things for the upcoming year. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the pitch. That's the story in short. A lot more to say, but just to get us in the mood. Thank you all for joining. Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shana Tova.
Natava, wonderful day, wonderful year. And
Sweet year filled with revealed blessings.
amen.